Hey y'all, welcome back. It is me, Britt Reacts, and today we're going to react to something new. This is from a channel called the Infographics Show, and the title of it is Roman Slavery versus American Slavery, how they were different. I'm going to tell you how we got here, but right after this intro. All right. This looks like American slavery here with the machete and bamboo. What kind of slavery is that in America? Oh, I don't know. And then Roman slavery with the grapes. Is that right, class? Class, am I right? All right, anyway, let's jump into it.
Two empires, two systems, both horrific, but built on very different rules. In ancient Rome, slavery was an everyday norm, essential to the rich and embedded in family life. But in America, it became a radicalized engine for profit, brutal, dehumanizing, and lifelong. On today's episode of the Infographics Show, we're looking at Roman slavery versus American slavery. How different were they? At the height of the Roman Empire, an estimated 10 to 20% of the population was enslaved. With around 50 to 60 million people living under Roman rule, that meant roughly 5 to 12 million were enslaved. However, some historians argue the number may have peaked as high as 15 million during Rome's most aggressive years of conquest. The Roman Empire stretched from Hadrian's Wall in northern England all the way to present-day Iraq, a massive expanse of land to put slaves to work. But despite the empire's size, most enslaved people lived in urban areas, particularly in what is now Italy. Many worked on the vast estates, or latifundia, owned by the wealthy elite. Slaves accompanied legions on foreign campaigns but were rarely armed as fighters. Military service was tied to citizenship, and arming enslaved people whose families you might have murdered was too risky. But slaves were indispensable on campaign. They would act as camp servants, hauling supplies, cooking, digging fortifications, tending to animals, and digging trench latrines. Still, in moments of extreme crisis, Rome did sometimes promise freedom to slaves who were willing to take up arms, just as thousands of black slaves would fight for the South in the American Civil War. But let's not jump ahead of ourselves. When you picture a Roman slave, many think of someone who worked to death under the lash, forced to gladiatorial combat or prostitution. While that grim reality was very real, Roman slavery was incredibly diverse, and not just in terms of what they did. They were taken from Italy, usually through debts or punishment, but also from Greece, Britain, Asia Minor, Gaul, Germania, and what we call the Balkans in Eastern Europe. They had different skin tones, hailing from Syria in Judea and today's Tunisia, Morocco, Algeria, and Egypt.
Goodness. Okay. So in my pursuit of knowledge, I am taking you all along with me. I've been learning so much from pages like The Fat Electrician, Casual Geographic, and now Oversimplified. And I just want to learn more. And in light of some of the previous debates I've watched of Charlie Kirk's, I don't bring that up coincidentally. I think, especially with the two most recent debates I watched of his before the assassination happened, it just made me think a lot about what I believe to be true, what I was taught and told was true, both in school and in church, and then what my life journey, experience, circumstances have taught me. And then I was doing my morning devotional and my study Bible, and one of the prompts was, I believe it was Paul. I can't remember who it was. Why didn't he condemn slavery in the book of Ephesians? I think I was in. And the breakdown in my devotional, in my study Bible, was that slavery in the biblical times was way different from the current day, or, the slavery we think of, the American slavery. They specified in the fact that slavery was embedded in the culture. It was a normal thing. And a lot of times some slaves were treated better than people of society. They were treated like part of their families. The title slave was just really in layman's terms, a job title or a career title. And so though, it's still, this is enslaving humans. It was done, I think, with a different intention. And slaves then were, their masters were also held to a standard of how to treat their slaves, and they were not allowed to do this or do that type of thing. So for me, it kind of just opened up my mind in a way that I never really thought about, because I think, especially here in America, you hear slavery, and you immediately think American slavery. And so then it just it prompted me to conquest out and learn more. And nothing is by coincidence. This landed on my YouTube home feed. And I'm like, maybe my audience would like to watch this with me. Maybe not. I don't know. So we're going to watch part of it together today. And then if you guys want to continue to watch it with me, learn with me, or teach me in the comments, I'm open to it. If I get enough, engagement, you guys let me know. Otherwise, I'll just watch it on my own and continue my pursuit of wisdom on my own. All right, but I just wanted to let you know, like, how we got here. I've really been enjoying these, like, history lessons. And, Charlie Kirk also, in his debates whenever statistic racism or racism as a whole, or all of these ideologies around Black people wanting reparations, all these things, he would always say, but slavery is not happening right now. Jesse Lee Peterson would say the same. Yeah, but slavery is not happening right now. And so then I think people would always defer back to slavery, or then a lot of times you hear people deferring back to slavery in the Bible, trying to justify American slavery. So I don't know. It just made me want to do my own work.
Some slaves performed manual labor under constant threat of violence, while others held skilled positions. They served as teachers, accountants, or even managed other slaves. Slavery wasn't viewed as immoral, possibly not even by the slaves. After all, in their country, there would have been slaves too. For instance, ancient tribes in today's Britain had slaves. Slavery was a global institution, not a fiendish black market enterprise shrouded in criticism. So they were literally everywhere in Roman society. In the fields, the cities, the baths, the markets, the military camps, even in state administration, Rome simply could not have functioned without them. The wealthy collected them like baseball cards as a symbol of their high status. The more slaves you owned, the higher you climbed on the social ladder. Some elite households owned hundreds, even thousands, some for the fields and some prized for their talents or specialized knowledge. The Roman state itself relied heavily on slaves. In the 1st century CE, around 700 slaves were employed just to maintain Rome's aqueduct system. Their wages paid out of public funds. Slaves maintained the sewer system. Most Romans weren't rich enough to have a private toilet, so they emptied their guts into one of the communal public latrines, wiping with a shared sponge. These public slaves likely had
wiping with a shared sponge? Lord have mercy. I'm so glad I was born in 1988. Jesus. A shared butt sponge. Doo-doo sponge, if you will. Oh, heavens, have mercy. That almost took me
wiping
out.
with a shared sponge.
That almost
These
took me
public
out.
slaves likely had it worse than the household slaves. Some may have worked as nightmen or waste collectors, pushing cartloads of excavated Roman poop beyond the city walls every night. Without them, Rome would soon have been overcome with stink and disease, showing that without slaves, society just wouldn't have functioned. Slave prices varied. A skilled or moderately skilled slave could fetch around 2,000 sesterces in the first 3 centuries CE. To better understand that, a Roman legionary in the 1st century CE earned up to 900 sesterces a year. But much of this was deducted for food, clothing, and equipment, so he likely came out with 600. Hence, slaves weren't.
Hey Siri, what was the value of sesterces in 1st century CE?
Do you want me to use?
She said, girl, I don't know, ask ChatGPT. Oh, Heavenly Father. And then she just quit on me. Hey Siri, what is a sesterce? Is that what he called it? Is that what he called it? This said etc. All right, somebody let me know in the comments. I think I said it wrong. I don't know.
For food, clothing, and equipment, so he likely came out with 600. Hence, slaves weren't cheap at all. Nonetheless, a centurion, commanding a century of soldiers, earned 15 to 20 times that amount, enough to purchase several slaves. Still, like slavery in the US many years later, Roman slave owning was mostly for the well-off people and elites. Wealthy senators, successful merchants, and landowners could own dozens or even hundreds, using their human property to farm vast estates or run profitable enterprises. With slaves, you often speculated to accumulate. They could be a great investment. Not all Roman slaves were treated cruelly. Many Roman children grew up alongside household slaves, some of whom were highly educated and respected for their expertise. Freedmen, former slaves, often maintained ties of loyalty and friendship with their old masters, sometimes even rising to wealth and influence themselves. But make no mistake, slaves had no legal rights. They could not legally marry, own property, or bring a case to court. A slave was a thing, like livestock. A master could lend, sell, beat, or kill a slave with near total impunity for most of Roman history. If a slave killed a master, Roman law sometimes mandated collective punishment. Every slave under the roof could be interrogated, tortured, or executed as a deterrent. Even in relatively good households, a slave's security depended entirely on the whims of his or her owners. Some slaves were quite literally worked to death. Despite being valuable investments, the labor was often so brutal that survival was secondary to profit. According to the Greek historian Diodorus Siculus, slaves in Roman mines made their masters.
Survival was secondary to profit.
According to the Greek historian Diodorus Siculus, slaves in Roman mines made their masters' fortunes, but often died from the exhaustion. He wrote, "They themselves wear out their bodies both by day and by night in the diggings under the earth, dying in large numbers because of the exceptional hardships, compelled beneath blows of the overseers." But evidence shows the Romans were careful not to push their slaves too far. And that was for one crucial reason: fear of revolt. After all, no master wanted to sleep under the same roof or eat food prepared by someone who secretly wanted them dead. The philosopher Seneca wrote, "It is creditable to a man to keep within reasonable bounds in his treatment of his slaves, believing even..."
Is Seneca missing a side tooth? Is he missing a side tooth there? Just wondering. From the looks of it, he's missing a side tooth.
A man to keep within reasonable bounds in his treatment of his slaves, believing even prisoners of war and slaves didn't deserve to be treated as animals. Slaves usually worked quietly in the background, cooking, cleaning, and often enduring advances from lustful masters or mistresses. At rich Roman banquets, slaves could be shared amongst the guests, and they had no choice. They were property. Abuse laws didn't cover them. Rome also had a thriving sex trade. Brothels operated openly, and men of all classes visited prostitutes without social stigma. Sleeping with a slave prostitute didn't count as adultery under Roman law. The crime only applied if a man had sex with a married, freeborn woman. Female clients were rarer, though satirists hinted wealthy women sometimes enjoyed their male slaves. High-class call girls, or meretrix, also existed. A session could cost around twice a laborer's daily wage, and most of the money went to the brothel owner or the pimp, making attractive slave prostitutes a lucrative business. We'll soon return to Roman daily life, but let's introduce American slavery. Enslavement in Africa goes back long before Europeans got involved, as far back as 1000 BCE.
This is everyone's favorite way to debunk the plight of current day African American people and their argument that Europeans are the reason, and this is everyone's favorite thing, is to go and say, yo, in Africa they were doing this long before Columbus and then pulled up. Okay, all right. And it's true. It is true. It was going on in Africa for as long as, I guess, civilization was there. Tribes were selling their tribe men, their women, their children. They were selling to other tribes, to other countries, to other, like, all types of things. Does it make one wrong? Right? No. But it's hard to have a fight in the blaming of white people, if we keep it a buck, when it was already happening in this land, and it was already a thing everywhere. Now, what we can blame is how it was done in America and what happened once they got to America. But this whole notion that Europeans that came to America and yada 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 are the sole reason that happened it's untrue. It's not factual. And I'm going to be really honest with you guys and tell you something that I don't think a vast majority of African American people know that. I don't think so. I didn't know it. I had no idea. In school, if they told us that, it left my mind, but I feel like it was, we were only focused on American slavery, and so that's what we learned about, and that's what's kind of drilled into you, is that slavery is an American issue, and slavery started here in America, and so anyway.
The trans-Saharan trade networks were moving captives from the West and Central Africa. After the Arab conquests of North Africa in the 7th century CE, this trade expanded massively. Muslim slave merchants transported enslaved Africans across the Sahara and the Indian Ocean, sending them as far as India, Java, and even China. By the 10th to 13th centuries, hundreds of thousands of Africans were enslaved in the Middle East and North Africa. Many men were castrated and forced into service as eunuchs. Women were trafficked into harems or pressed into domestic labor. Historians estimate that around 10 to 18 million Africans were taken eastward over the centuries, a vast trade that would later run parallel to the Atlantic trade. From the 1500s to the 1800s, North African raiders abducted between 1 and 1.25 million Europeans, even seizing children from coastal towns in southern England. When Mansa Musa, the emperor of Mali, made his pilgrimage to Mecca in the 14th century, it's said he brought with him 14,000 enslaved young women, though that number is debated by some historians. Then, in the 15th century, Europeans began trading sub-Saharan African slaves. By 1448, the Portuguese had already purchased around 1,000 enslaved Africans, sending them to Madeira and the Azores for early sugar plantations. Much of this trade relied on African intermediaries. Powerful kingdoms and coastal rulers captured or purchased captives from inland raids and sold them to European merchants. By the late 1400s, Portuguese traders, including some Lonsados, those married to Africans, had established posts along the West African coast, creating the foundations of a massive transcontinental industry. Soon the Spanish, the Dutch, British, and French joined in, sending ships regularly to Africa to buy captives for transport across the Atlantic. The journey to the Americas, the Middle Passage, was a living nightmare. Captives were chained, starved, crammed into filthy holds, and exposed to disease for weeks at sea.
This is a vast difference from the Roman slave treatment. If you remember why we're here, we're comparing the two. This is where, humanity is lost. Right here. I guess it's lost at the trading people for money, but then to enslave them and literally treat them, I don't even want to say cattle, because you shouldn't treat cattle this way, okay? But it's sad. It's sad to think that this is how people were treated.
Between 10 and 20% died en route, meaning that out of the 12.5
dead
million
bodies, feces, urine, odors, crying children, men and women, just imagine on the ocean, seasickness, come on.
Between 10 and 20% died en route, meaning that out of the 12.5 million Africans forcibly shipped across the Atlantic, about 1.8 million perished before they even reached the shore.
And they just
Some jumped overboard thinking death was better than a life of brutal bondage. At 20 to 30 pounds a slave, death and jumping could get expensive for traders. The Portuguese were the largest traffickers, responsible for an estimated 5.8 million captives, mostly sent to Brazil. The British followed, transporting an estimated 3.2 million enslaved people during the transatlantic slave trade. Of those,
And this is how we have Afro-Latinas, correct? That's a question. It's because of how many Africans were transported to South America, right? Let me know in the comments.
0.2 million were sent to the Caribbean colonies, while around 265,000 were brought to North America. According to the Slave Voyages database, the U.S. itself would take over 305,000 from Africa. But by 1860, after generations were born into slavery, the African American population had grown to 4.4 million, and around 3.95 million were enslaved. That meant that over 10% of the U.S. population, then 31 million, lived in bondage. Britain passed the Slave Trade Act in 1807 banning the transatlantic trade, but slavery itself remained legal in its empire until the Slavery Abolition Act of 1833, which freed enslaved people. Britain paid £20 million to slave owners, not the enslaved. The U.S. ended slavery in 1865 with the 13th Amendment, but as W.E.B. Du Bois later wrote in his book Black Reconstruction in America, this marked the beginning of a new era of oppression in the South. Freed people faced black codes, racial terror, and systemic disenfranchisement, ensuring they remained at the bottom of the social order. It's often said that the first African slaves arrived in the future USA in 1619. A Dutch privateer seized 20 to 30 Angolan captives from a Portuguese slaver and subsequently sold them to English colonists at Jamestown. But Africans had been enslaved in the Americas earlier. The Spanish transported enslaved Africans to their Caribbean colonies and also present-day Florida in 1565. The 1619 Angolans were recorded as indentured servants, not slaves, much like poor Europeans already toiling on plantations in Virginia. These new Africans were put to work on tobacco farms, which the Virginia Company of London had established 12 years earlier. Like the white
I thought it was bamboo. That's what tobacco looks like, guys? Learn me something new. Tobacco looks like bamboo? I had no idea.
indentured servants, they were commodities, abducted objects to be used in brutal forced labor. Today we recognize them as the first U.S. slaves, but it's more complicated than that. In the same year another shipment landed, a group described in colonial records as Society's Sweepings. These were children from England, destitute kids, aged 8 to 16, many snatched straight from the streets. Torn from their families, they were packed onto ships and sent to the colonies to toil. Most would die within a few years from disease, malnutrition, violence, or exhaustion. Was this slavery? In 2008, NPR ran an article titled America's First Slaves, Whites, citing research from the book White Cargo, The Forgotten History of Britain's White Slaves in America. The book makes a strong case that while not perpetual or radicalized like African slavery would become, this early system was slavery in all but name. It laid the groundwork for racial slavery, and as you'll soon see, even racism. The main difference was that a proportion of these people technically had contracts promising freedom after 3 to 7 years. For that reason, they were cheap, but the system could be cheated by Virginia's elites. Between 300,000 and 500,000 British and Irish people were sent to the colonies over roughly 150 years as so-called indentured servants, many unwillingly. Ship records listed them as cargo alongside livestock and supplies. About 30% died on the voyage and another 40% in bondage, leaving only a fraction surviving. The myth that they chose servitude—
What is that at the bottom? Is that a chicken leg? What is that at the bottom? This is crazy, guys.
is only partly true. While some signed under economic desperation, many were duped, coerced, forced, or outright kidnapped. Around 20% were forced there directly from prisons. Petty thieves, vagrants, political dissidents, gypsies, prostitutes, and, quote, anyone else who displeased the upper classes. Tens of thousands of children were taken, many spirited away, meaning stolen off the streets by press gangs. Just one of these traffickers, the spirit named William Tiene, kidnapped 840 kids from Britain in a single year. An article on the process stated, children arriving without indentures could face much longer terms of service. Women servants often faced sexual violence. Some were sent specifically to breed children, boosting future labor supplies. If a child was born to a servant, whether from abuse or not, it was bound to serve until at least age 21, ensuring planters had a next generation of free labor. In the Virginia law against fornication, it stated that if a woman became pregnant, her master had to pay a fine. If he didn't, she was whipped. In 1662, a new law said that if her master made her pregnant, after she finished her contract, she had to be sold to the parish for another 2 years for the time lost in pregnancy. In 1691, a new law said, if a white servant had a child with a black male, she will have 5 years added to her service, and the child will be indentured for 30 years. Complaints of violence or sexual abuse were nearly always ignored by colonial courts. Beatings were routine. One horrific case is that of Elizabeth Abbott, abducted from England. After repeated escape attempts, her master whipped her 500 times, killing her. Nobody was charged. Records say that from the shipment she arrived with 300 children, only 12
From the shipment she arrived with. Oh,
Records say that from the shipment she arrived with 300 children, only 12 survived over 2 years. Out of 5,000 servants arriving in one colony between 1670 and 1680, only 241 ever became landowners. Most, around 3,500, died before completing their contract. If a master died, servants were passed along as debts or property, listed in wills alongside livestock and tobacco. Many indentured servants described their condition as slavery for a term, but knowing many never lived long enough to see freedom, contemporaries saw servants as slaves too. The Dutch trader David Pieter de Vries remarked that English planters gambled away their servants at card games, treating human lives as poker chips. He said planters often worked them to death. To a cold-blooded businessman, it made sense to grind down a temporary worker and replace him with another cheap body. Indentured servants were supposed to have basic rights, but records show these were mostly fiction. Colonial courts almost always sided with the planters if there were complaints of abuse. Contracts could be extended on trumped-up charges, breaking a tool, talking back, or falling ill. Idleness or insubordination often ended in chains, mutilation, or branding.
are these bruises? Oh, when are we going to get back? I need to take a break. This is so much, guys. I'm just trying to scan and see when they're going to... Okay, it doesn't look like they're going back to the Roman Empire for a while, so we'll stop right here. I'm going to give it, find a good stopping point and we'll stop.
Some had their ears clipped or bore scars from savage whippings.
Clipping
So, was
ears?
this slavery? By any modern standard, yes, it was a form of slavery. It wasn't perpetual or radicalized like African slavery would become, but for many, even back then, it was slavery in all but name. White servants
Holy moly. Seems humanity has always been doomed. Doesn't matter when you were born. This is sad. All right, let me know in the comments if we should continue on, if you are familiar with this page, if you learned anything new, if I was wrong about anything. Talk to me down below. Thanks for watching and coming along on my pursuit of knowledge, and go and have the day you deserve.